Chapter 10. Counterattack 2. Returning the burden of proof. The second key response is returning the burden of proof. If he is the one making the accusation, he is the one who must prove it. This is one of the basic principles of civilized argument, law, science, and normal communication. You cannot throw an accusation into the air and then demand that others justify themselves for every person in the world. The formula sounds like this: you made the accusation, not me, so you are the one who has to prove it, not me, justify myself for every psychic in the world. The important part is not the word psychics, but the structure. It shows that the other person is trying to shift his work onto you. He made the claim, but wants you to pay the cost of proving it. In everyday life, you can say it more briefly: the accusation is yours, so the evidence is yours too. Or, I am not required to prove the opposite until you prove the original claim. In public discussion, it sounds even stronger. You are now replacing the verification of your claim with a test of my loyalty. This phrase is especially useful in front of an audience because it shows the mechanism of the attack to the spectators. This technique brings the conversation back to the ground. Instead of moral fog, simple questions appear: who, what, when, where, what evidence supports it, and what degree of generalization is acceptable. The manipulator does not like this because his power was in the vague accusation. When the demand for evidence is switched on, the magic of the label begins to weaken. Chapter 11. Why you should not say too softly, "You misunderstood me." The phrase, "you misunderstood me," often seems diplomatic, but in this situation, it can be weak because it moves the problem into the area of misunderstanding. The other person did not always make an accidental mistake. Sometimes he did not misunderstand you. He distorted you in a way that was useful to him. If you only say, "You misunderstood me," you leave him the opportunity to answer, "No, I understood everything correctly." And then the argument again goes into the fog of psychology. He discusses what you supposedly meant, and you begin to explain your soul. This is a bottomless trap. It is better to speak not about his understanding, but about the structure of the substitution. You are attributing to me a position I did not take, or you are replacing my thesis with another one that is easier for you to attack. This formulation is more precise, stronger, and colder. It does not ask the other person to be kinder. It records a violation of the rules of argument. You can add a final frame: my position is simple. I am against baseless generalizations. That is short and sufficient. You do not need to list all your moral beliefs. You do not need to give a confession when the problem is that the other person substituted the subject of the conversation. Chapter 12. The curious side. How people accidentally become lawyers for the whole world. There is an almost comic side to this attack. As soon as a person objects to a crude generalization, he is appointed lawyer for an entire category. Not all bloggers are scammers, and now you are the lawyer of bloggers. Not all officials are thieves, and now you are the lawyer of bureaucracy. Not all rich people stole their money, and now you are the defender of global capital in a home chat. The comedy is that the person never applied for this position. He did not open a law firm called Defense of All Suspicious People on the Planet. He simply asked for accuracy. But it is useful for the manipulator to inflate your cautious phrase into global defense of the bad side. In public debates, this sometimes looks like theater of the absurd. One participant says, "Let's separate proven cases from rumors." The second replies, "So you want to say victims should not be believed?" The first person was speaking about verification procedure, but a cruel moral position was attributed to him. The audience is left to choose whether they see the substitution or surrender to the emotional music of accusation. That is why it is useful to have a short and even slightly ironic response. "Do not appoint me lawyer for a thesis I did not state," or "I am not defending them. I am not buying your generalization." Such a phrase reduces the pathos of the attack and returns control to you at the same time. Manipulation loves tragedy, but it handles precise and calm irony badly. Chapter 13. How to neutralize the attack in front of an audience. When the conversation happens in front of spectators, it is important to speak not only to the opponent, but also to the audience. The audience must see what happened. You do not need to turn your response into a lecture, but you do need to name the mechanism. The ideal response sounds in a way that makes people understand. Someone attributed a foreign position to you, and you are returning the discussion to facts. For example, a substitution is happening right now. I did not defend corruption. I said that the accusation all officials are thieves requires evidence. This phrase works on two levels. For the opponent, it sets a boundary. For the audience, it decodes the trick. If the person continues to pressure you, you can strengthen it. You are again trying to replace the question of evidence with the question of my loyalty. These are different things. Here, you are not arguing with every emotional jab. You are showing the repeated pattern. And when a pattern is named, it loses part of its power. In front of an audience, it is important not to look confused. The more you rush around, the easier it is to make you look guilty. That is why a short structure is better than a long one. Do not attribute. Prove the thesis. Let's return to the facts. It sounds almost like a command in battle, and that is exactly the rhythm needed when a conversation is being turned into a public trial of your morality. Chapter 14. The connection to the present, social media, cancel culture, and the speed of labels. In the modern world, this attack has become especially popular because of the speed of communication. Social media loves short moral signals. There, the winner is often not the person who is more precise, but the person who attaches a label faster. Algorithms promote emotion, outrage, conflict, and clear division into good and bad people. In such an environment, asking for facts can be perceived as delaying the spectacle. The crowd already wants the final scene, punishment, and moral conclusion, while you suggest opening the case materials. This irritates those who came not to understand, but to belong to the correct side. That is why you may be accused of blurring the obvious. But this is exactly where a mature rhetorical position is needed. Civilized thinking differs from the crowd in its ability to condemn evil and demand evidence at the same time. You can be against fraud and against a collective label. You can support victims and still not abolish the presumption of fact. A modern person who wants to speak strongly must learn to withstand the pressure of moral blackmail. Not every demand to immediately condemn something is a virtue. Sometimes it is simply a way to force you to sign someone else's slogan without reading the fine print. And if you can say, I am against evil, but I am not against facts, you preserve your intellectual sovereignty. Chapter 15. Practical Arsenal, Ready-Made Response Formulas. The first formula is calm separation. I am not defending the bad side. I do not accept your generalization without evidence. This is a universal response for most everyday situations. It does not sound aggressive, but it clearly breaks the false link. There is no long confession in it, so it is harder for the other person to pull you into justification. The second formula is returning responsibility. You made the accusation, so you must provide the evidence. This phrase is especially useful when the person demands that you answer for all members of some group. You are not required to be the lawyer of humanity. You are responsible only for your words, and he is responsible for his accusation. The third formula is identifying the substitution. You are now replacing my thesis with another one that is more convenient for you to attack. This works well with more intellectual or public opponents. Such a phrase sounds like a diagnosis of a rhetorical violation. It shows that you see not only the content, but also the technique. The fourth formula is returning to the subject. My point is not about defense, it is about accuracy. Let's return to specifics. This is softer but still strong. It is suitable for situations where you do not want to escalate, but also do not want to surrender the frame. The main thing is to actually return to specifics after this phrase, not start justifying yourself. The fifth formula is the final boundary. I will not defend myself against a position you invented for me. This is a harder version. It is worth using when the other person repeats the substitution several times. This phrase closes the door to further interrogation and shows that the game of artificial accusation is over. Chapter 16. Typical mistakes, how people strengthen the attack against themselves. The first mistake is accepting the assigned role. A person begins to answer as if he really is required to prove that he does not defend bad people. He speaks a lot, gets nervous, clarifies, explains, and gives biographical examples. On the surface, this may look sincere, but in an argument, it looks like defense. The second mistake is arguing with the emotion instead of the structure. When someone says you support corruption, the instinct is to react with outrage. How can you say that? But outrage leaves you inside the same frame. It is better to name the construction. You created a false link between disagreement with a generalization and support for corruption. The third mistake is trying to please everyone. A person wants not to offend the accuser, not to look bad in front of the audience, and still preserve accuracy. As a result, he speaks too softly, vaguely, and at length. Manipulation feeds on this softness, because the more fog there is, the easier it is to insert someone else's label into it. The fourth mistake is switching into mirror aggression. For example, you are the one defending liars, or you are just stupid. This may give brief emotional relief, but it destroys your position. The stronger person is not the one who hits louder, but the one who holds the frame, names the substitution, and returns the conversation to evidence. Chapter 17. Finale. The freedom not to pick up someone else's accusation. Artificial attribution of a position is dangerous because it steals a person's right to complex thought. It says, you are either fully with me or you are with the enemy. But mature speech begins exactly where a person refuses to live inside such primitive forks. He can refuse to defend evil and at the same time refuse to accept a baseless label. In a world of fast accusations, the ability to distinguish is becoming a rare skill. It is easy to shout, everyone is guilty. It is harder to ask, who exactly, of what exactly, on what evidence, to what degree, and with what responsibility. But these are the questions that separate justice from the crowd, investigation from gossip, and rhetoric from harassment. The right response to this attack does not require a long philosophy. It is enough to remember three supports. Do not accept the attributed position, break the false link, and return the burden of proof. I am not defending the bad side. I do not accept your generalization. Prove your thesis. These three phrases already contain the structure of strong defense. And if this topic were to be concluded with one thought, it would be this: not everyone who asks for evidence is defending the guilty. Sometimes he is defending the very possibility of an honest conversation. And an honest conversation is a space where an accusation must be precise, a position must not be substituted, and a person is not required to carry a flag that someone forced into his hands. Chapter 1. Prologue. The trap, where someone hands you another person's flag. There is a special kind of rhetorical attack that looks almost harmless, but works like a trap. You are not defending a criminal. You are not justifying corruption. You are not taking the side of a liar. You are simply asking for precision, facts, or a more careful formulation. But at that moment, the other person suddenly changes the scene. Instead of discussing his claim, he puts someone else's flag into your hands and declares that you now represent the bad side. You say, not all officials are thieves, and he replies, I see, so you support corruption. This is how artificial attribution of a position is born. It is not an argument about substance, but a substitution of the map of reality. You were standing in the position of caution, but you were redrawn as a defender of evil. In discourse, this resembles a forged courtroom scene, where instead of the real defendant, a random passerby is placed in the dock. The person does not prove that his generalization is true. He forces you to prove that you are not a monster. This attack is especially powerful because it plays on the ancient fear of being expelled from the tribe. In a primitive group, being suspected of supporting the enemy could mean being threatened with exclusion, and exclusion could once cost a person his life. Today, no one is throwing you out of a cave, but the social nervous system works almost the same way. You are suddenly placed next to corrupt officials, abusers, scammers, liars, or traitors, and you feel the urge to retreat, justify yourself, and explain that you are not like that. But that is exactly the design of the trap. While you are justifying yourself, you have already accepted the other person's frame. While you are proving that you do not defend bad people, the main question disappears. Was the original accusation precise, proven, honest, and specific? Artificial attribution of a position is a technique that turns your question about evidence into suspicion against you personally. Chapter 2. Where this technique came from the tribal fire to the television studio. In ancient times, a person rarely argued alone. Behind every word stood a group, a clan, a city, an army, a faith, or a tribe. If you disagreed with the leader, it could be interpreted not as clarification, but as betrayal. Political and rhetorical culture grew out of a world where neutrality was often considered suspicious and caution was treated as a weak form of treason. In ancient Athens, where citizens argued in public squares and courts, the danger of this substitution already existed. Sophists, orators, and prosecutors understood that it is easier to defeat not the argument the opponent actually made, but the argument that can be attributed to him. If a person doubted a harsh punishment, he could be portrayed as a friend of criminals. If he asked to hear the other side, he could be presented as an enemy of the city. In Rome, a similar mechanism worked in political accusations. It was enough to hint that a person was soft on the enemies of the Republic, and his position became toxic even before the facts were analyzed. Cicero, the great master of judicial and political speech, often understood the power of association. It is not always necessary to prove that a person is guilty. Sometimes it is enough to place him in bad company. Here, rhetoric became the art of lighting. Place a person next to a shadow, and the public will begin to see him as part of that shadow. In the modern era, this technique became a weapon of newspapers, revolutions, propaganda, and mass ideologies. During periods of crisis, society often looks not for nuance but for an enemy, and if you say, "Let's examine this," someone may answer, "So you are on their side." This is how the ancient fear of betrayal moved from the tribal fire into parliament, newspapers, talk shows, Twitter, YouTube comments, and everyday arguments at the kitchen table. Chapter 3. What the attack looks like. The magic of the phrase, "So you are on their side." This attack usually begins with a sweeping generalization. A person says, "All officials are thieves, all bloggers are sellouts, all men are like that, all women lie, all psychics are scammers, all rich people got rich dishonestly." You disagree not because you defend bad behavior, but because you see a logical whole. The word "all" requires massive evidence. But instead of evidence, the person makes a leap. Aha, so you are defending them. The main formula of the attack is this: disagreement with my generalization equals support for the people I condemn. This is a false connection, stitched together with rough thread, but in an emotional conversation, it often seems persuasive. If you ask for facts, you are declared the advocate of the guilty person. If you refuse to repeat a label, you are made an ally of the bad side. The phrases may vary, but the mechanism is the same. It became interesting to hear your arguments, but unfortunately, there are none. Here the person is not merely arguing, he is already portraying you as defeated. Because you stood up in their defense, here he attributes to you an action you never performed. You are not condemning him loudly enough. Here the intensity of your condemnation is turned into a test of moral purity. In everyday life, this happens constantly. A group is discussing a conflict, and someone says, "She is definitely lying." You answer, "We do not know all the circumstances." The reply comes, "I see, you are on her side." That is it. The argument about facts has been turned into a loyalty test, and you are no longer a participant in the discussion, but a suspect. Chapter 4. Why it works. People fear looking immoral. The power of this technique lies not in logic, but in social pressure. People do not want to look like defenders of corruption, abuse, deception, betrayal, or cruelty. Even when the accusation is absurd, the association itself already stains the person. In rhetoric, this can be called the contamination of a position. Moral dirt from a foreign image is thrown onto your neutral or analytical thought. When someone says to you, "So you support corruption," a defensive mode may switch on inside you. You want to explain quickly, "No, I am against corruption. I just meant." But at that moment, you have already changed the subject. You are no longer discussing the generalization, the evidence, or the correctness of the accusation. You are undergoing a moral inspection. This technique works especially well in front of an audience. One-on-one, a person can still calmly say, "You are substituting my position." But when there are spectators nearby, a chat, colleagues, friends, or followers, the fear of reputational damage appears. It feels as though, if you do not justify yourself immediately, someone may actually think that you are defending the bad side. That is why this technique is often used in public conflicts. It does not require complex argumentation, but it quickly mobilizes emotion. The opponent does not need to be defeated with facts. He needs to be placed next to something unpleasant. In the eyes of the crowd, sometimes it is enough not to prove guilt, but to create the smell of guilt. Chapter 5, Related Concepts: Straw Man, Guilt by Association, and False Dilemma. Artificial attribution of a position is connected to several classic rhetorical and logical distortions. The first is the straw man. The person does not argue with your real position. He creates an ugly copy of it and then triumphantly destroys it. You say, evidence is needed, and he responds as if you said, guilty people do not exist at all. The second related concept is guilt by association. This is when someone tries to spoil a position by placing it next to a bad group, person, or phenomenon. You doubt a specific accusation, and someone says, that is what defenders of scammers usually say. The goal is not to analyze your argument, but to attach unpleasant company to it. The third concept is the false dilemma. The speaker pretends that there are only two options. Either you fully agree with his generalization, or you are defending evil. But real life is almost always broader than that. You can oppose corruption and oppose baseless accusations at the same time. You can condemn abuse and demand verification of facts. You can refuse to support a person and still refuse to call him guilty without grounds. These three mechanisms often work together like a small rhetorical gang. The straw man distorts your position, guilt by association contaminates it, and the false dilemma closes the exits. As a result, you are driven into a narrow corridor where any disagreement looks suspicious. The task of a competent response is not to run down that corridor, but to show that the corridor itself was built dishonestly. Chapter 6, The Historical Stage: Hunting Enemies and Suspecting Nuance. History knows many eras when nuance became dangerous. During religious conflicts, a person who tried to speak about proportion, procedure, or evidence could be declared a supporter of heresy. During revolutions, doubt about the cruelty of the crowd could look like sympathy for the old regime. During wars and national crises, the phrase, "let's verify the facts," often sounded to fanatics almost like treason. This appeared especially clearly in political purges and ideological campaigns. The logic was simple. If you are not fully with us, then you are against us. This formula is convenient for those who do not want to discuss arguments, but want to sort people into loyal and disloyal categories. It destroys the gray zone where reason, law, investigation, and justice usually live. In the 20th century, mass propaganda made this mechanism especially visible. Newspapers, radio, and later television learned to create moral camps. Here are the good people, there are the bad people, and there should be no bridges between them. A person who tried to distinguish degree of guilt, context, proof, and responsibility risked being called a useful idiot of the enemy. In such conditions, the very ability to think became suspicious. Today, the technique has become democratic and everyday. It no longer requires a dictator, a newspaper editorial office, or a political headquarters. A group chat, comments under a video, or a family dinner is enough. A person takes a major moral topic and uses it like a club. You are not repeating my slogan, so you are defending those I hate. Chapter 7. Everyday Scenes: Kitchen, Chat, Office, and Friend Group. In everyday conversation, this attack often appears when people discuss dramatic stories. Someone describes a relationship conflict and immediately appoints the guilty party. You say, maybe it is worth hearing the other side. The reply is, well, of course, you are just defending people like that. At that moment, you are forced to choose not between facts, but between moral masks. In the office, this can look even more subtle. One employee says, all managers only shift responsibility. Another replies, not all of them. Sometimes the problem is in the process and communication. The first person parries, oh, right, of course, defend the bosses. And now the conversation is no longer about the process, but about whose side you are on. In friend groups, the technique is often disguised as a joke. What are you, his lawyer? They say when you try to add precision. Formally, this may sound light, but its function is serious. You are being forced to step back from analysis so you do not look strange in front of the group. As a result, the conversation degrades into a competition over who can condemn more loudly. In chats, This attack is especially poisonous because written format transmits tone poorly. One careful phrase can be torn out of context, quoted separately, and presented as evidence of your position. You were writing about procedure, but moral defense was attributed to you. That is why, in written argument, it is especially important to formulate your response briefly, firmly, and without long justifications. Chapter 8. The main danger. You are pulled into justification. Instead of discussing facts, the main goal of the attack is to make you justify yourself, not to discuss the thesis, not to check the facts, not to return the burden of proof, but to explain why you are a good person. This sharply lowers your position. You were a participant in the argument, and now you are someone undergoing a test of moral reliability. The most common mistake is to answer, "I am not defending anyone, honestly." This phrase feels natural, but it is weak. Fear can already be heard in it. It confirms that the other person has the right to interrogate you and that you are required to prove your purity. The second mistake is to explain your moral position at length. A person starts saying, "Actually, I have always been against corruption. I believe scammers should be punished. I myself had cases where." This may be sincere, but strategically it is losing. The longer the justification, the stronger the impression that you are defending yourself against a serious suspicion. The third mistake is to ask a weak question. "Why do you think that?" Such a question gives the initiative to the other person. He can say, "Because you stood up for them," and the circle closes. It is better not to ask him to explain your imaginary guilt, but to immediately break the false connection. Chapter 9. Counterattack 1. Breaking the false link. The first strong response is called breaking the false link. Its meaning is simple: to show that disagreement with a label is not the same as defending the bad side. You are not required to accept the other person's logical glue. You can separate two different questions: your attitude toward bad behavior and the quality of the specific accusation. The formula sounds like this: do not distort it. I am not defending scammers. I am against you calling everyone a scammer without specifics. There are 3 moves in this phrase. First, you name the distortion, then you reject the attributed position, then you return the real subject of the conversation. This is not justification. It is restoration of the frame. A version for an everyday conflict. I am not saying he is right. I am saying your accusation has not been proven yet. A version for a political argument. I am not defending corruption. I do not accept the generalization "everyone" because it requires evidence. A version for a conversation about reputation. I am not obliged to call a person guilty just because you have already decided. The strength of this response lies in its dryness. It does not ask for permission. It is not softened by unnecessary explanations, and it does not swear moral purity. It is like a knife cutting the rope with which someone tried to tie you to the wrong side. After that, the other person must either prove his thesis or reveal that he only knows how to attach labels.